You never expected this. No one does. Life seemed to move forward like a long, straight, predictable road, until suddenly, a curve ripped the ground from under you. You loved him. You trusted him. And when you saw those 2 lines on the test, even with your heart racing, you smiled. Because you thought you'd have someone to share every beat of the tiny heart growing inside you. But he vanished. Without explanations. Without gubie. He was just gone, leaving you alone, pregnant, with more questions than strength. You tried to be strong. Tried not to cry in front of your mother. Tried not to look desperate at work. Tried not to feel afraid when you laid your head on the pillow at night. But it was impossible. Every sleepless night, you asked yourself if you had done something wrong. Was it your fault? Did he never really love you? Or does love, when you need it most, simply vanish into thin air? As your belly grew, so did the doubts. But you didn't stop. You faced every ultrasound alone. Learned to assemble the crib with online tutorials.
Bought the first baby on Asia with leftover grocery money.
And still, you found space in your heart to love that tiny being you didn't yet know, but who had already become your reason to live. The months went by. Then came labor, pain, tears, and that first meeting. Your son. His eyes. A piece of you with a trace of him. You didn't know it was possible to love someone so deeply, so instantly. Yet even among feedings and diapers, there was still a silence. A void. The question that never left you. Why did he leave? You decided that the past wouldn't define your child's future. You raised him with dignity, even when bills piled up and smiles ran dry. You taught him kindness, even when the world was cruel to you. And he grew, smart, curious, and carrying a question deep inside, just like you did.
Mom, where is my dad?
The first time he asked, you froze. The world stopped for a second. You didn't want to lie. But you also didn't want to break his heart. You answered gently, like handing over a thorn wrapped in cotton. He had to go, but it was never your fault. And you saw in his eyes a doubt you knew all too well. Over time, he stopped asking. But you knew that doubt lived inside him, asleep, waiting for the right moment to wake up. And it did. He was 18 when he said he wanted to find his father. Your heart nearly stopped. It was like opening an old wound, a scar you preferred not to touch. But you understood. And even though you were scared, you supported him. You gave him the only photo you kept, hidden in the back of a drawer. A faded picture from a time that barely seemed real. He left with that image in hand, determined to uncover the truth life had hidden from him for so long. The days felt endless while you waited. Every message that didn't come made your heart beat faster. You imagined 1,000 different outcomes. What if he found him? What if he was disappointed? What if he didn't come back the same? Then, the phone rang. Your son's voice was trembling. Mom, I found him.
The world span.
You wanted to ask everything at once, but you just listened. He was in another city. They had talked. A lot. But what hurt the most was when he said, he didn't know. You didn't understand. What do you mean he didn't know? The man who left you pregnant didn't know he had left a child behind? Your son explained. After that night, the man had an accident. He lost part of his memory, years of his youth erased, like pages torn from a book. He recovered, built a new life, and never knew you were looking for him, that you were pregnant, that a son had been waiting for him.
Tears fell down your face like summer rain.
Suddenly, all those nights of anguish, the unanswered questions, the feeling of abandonment, it all took on a new meaning. You felt anger, relief, pain, hope.
A las 11.
It was like reliving the past with a new script. Your son asked if you wanted to meet him. And you hesitated. After so many years, you didn't even know if you could face that face again. But you knew you had to. You needed to close that chapter, to look into the eyes of the man who changed your life, even if he didn't remember you. Days later, the meeting was set. You, your son, and him.
The man who once promised you forever and disappeared like smoke.
When he walked into the cafe, your heart raced. He looked at you, and for a moment, it seemed like he recognized you.
A look lost between broken memories.
He apologized. He cried. He explained every missing piece of the story.
You listened.
Not because you wanted to relive the pain, but because you needed to understand. And when he held your son's hand, something inside you calmed. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. You went home with a lighter heart. Not because everything had been resolved, but because you understood that some stories don't have happy endings, they have possible ones. Your son got his answers.
And you found peace.
The months that followed were filled with silence and reflection. You didn't want to rekindle the past with him. But you didn't hate him anymore. Forgiving was your way of moving forward. Of honoring everything you built with courage. Even alone. Your son started visiting him occasionally. He brought childhood photos, funny school stories, memories his father had missed, but could now at least hear about. You watched them from a distance, like watching an old movie with a different ending. Today, looking back, you don't feel pain anymore.
You feel pride. Because you're as the man of integrity.
Because you faced everything with dignity. Because even through abandonment, you never abandoned love. And if there's one thing life taught you, it's that people don't always stay, but the fruits of true love remain. Your son is proof of that. So if you're hearing this story now, and you feel alone, lost, or broken by someone who left, remember, your strength is greater than you think. And time, even when it feels cruel, always brings the truth to light. Just like it did for her. For you. And yet, even with answers now on the table, something inside you remained unsettled. Not regret, but a quiet ache. Because you realized that what was lost wasn't just time, or even love. It was the chance to grow together, to face parenthood as a team. It was the late-night talks you never had, the first steps he never saw, the lullabies sung by only one voice. Your son, though, had changed. Not in a bad way. He was more centered, calmer. As if a piece of his own identity had finally clicked into place. He asked more questions now. Not just about his father, but about you. Your story.
Your strength.
The quiet sacrifices you made without ever asking for anything in return. You didn't expect him to want to know the full truth. But he did. So you told him about the night you found out you were pregnant, about the fear that followed, and how every single day after that was a decision to fight. He sat in silence, eyes wide, taking in every word like sacred history. For the first time, he saw not just his mother, but the woman you were before him. One evening, he brought home an old notebook. I want to write this down, he said.
Your story.
My story. Our truth. You smiled, surprised. He didn't want it for the world. He wanted it for himself. As if writing it would somehow protect it, keep it alive long after voices go quiet and memories fade. But something unexpected happened. As he began to write, he started asking about love. Not just the love you had for him, but the love that once sparked between you and the man who disappeared. Did you ever really love him? He asked one night. And you paused, not because you didn't know the answer, but because you hadn't spoken it aloud in years. Yes, you whispered. I did. But love alone isn't always enough. He nodded, but his eyes told you he was trying to understand something bigger.
Maybe about love.
Maybe about loss. Maybe about how the two often live side by side, in the same heart. Later that week, your son invited you to dinner. But it wasn't just the two of you. He had also invited his father.
Your pulse quickened when you walked into the room.
The man who once vanished now sat at your table, nervous but sincere. The tension was palpable, but underneath it, there was something else. A shared history.
A recognition.
Not of romance, but of responsibility. They talked about music. About books. Your son shared stories about his first heartbreak, his dreams of travel, his love for photography. And for the first time, you saw him not as a boy seeking answers, but as a man offering connection. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what could still be salvaged. The man, your once love, didn't pretend to be a father he never was. But he tried. He asked questions. He listened. And when your son showed him the photos from his childhood, there was something painfully beautiful in his silence.
You saw a man mourning moments he never got to life.
In the days that followed, you found yourself thinking about things you hadn't in years. Not with bitterness, but with curiosity. What would your life have looked like if he had stayed? Would it have been easier, or just a different kind of hard? You didn't have the answers. And maybe that was okay. But fate wasn't done yet. One morning, a letter arrived at your door. No name on the envelope, just your address.
Inside, a handwritten note.
It was from him.
Not your son.
Him. He wrote about the accident. About waking up in a hospital not knowing who he was. About a recurring dream of a woman's face, yours, but never knowing if it was real. He apologized. Again. But this time, not with guilt. With grief. For the years that passed. For the family he never knew he had. For the silence that had unintentionally broken so much. He asked nothing from you, only to be allowed to know who you had become. Not because he felt entitled, but because he finally understood what he had missed. You folded the letter and held it close. Not because the words healed everything, but because they meant someone had finally seen your pain.
You weren't invisible anymore. You weren't the forgotten chapter in someone else's story.
You were the whole book. Your son continued writing. Pages turned into chapters. Chapters into meaning. And as he wrote, he told you, this isn't just about him.
It's about you.
And how every time the world tried to bury you, you bloomed anyway. You smiled through tears. Because you knew he saw you fully now. Not just as the one who stayed, but as the one who survived. There were no promises made after that.
No grand gestures.
Just quiet, intentional moments. Dinners shared, long talks, memories rebuilt piece by piece. The past wasn't erased. But it no longer held you prisoner. You had finally stepped outside its shadow. Then one afternoon, your son asked you something you never expected. Would you ever love again?
The question lingered in the air, delicate, daring.
And in that moment, you realized. You hadn't thought about love in a long time.
Real love.
The kind that doesn't disappear in the night. The kind that stays through storms and silence. You looked at your son, surprised by his question, and for a moment, you didn't know how to answer. But then you realized. Maybe the answer had been changing quietly inside you, without your noticing. I don't know, you said honestly. Maybe. But not because I need someone. I've built a life without needing. If love comes, it will have to be a love that adds to what I've already created. And he nodded, as if that made all the sense in the world. Because it did. That night, as you sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies, your thoughts drifted again, not to the past this time, but to possibility. What if love was still out there, not as a rescue, but as a reward? Not to fix you, but to walk beside you. Someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. Someone who'd ask about your day and genuinely listen. Your phone buzzed. A message. It was him again. Not your son's father, but someone new. Someone who had been quietly showing up at the bookstore you now worked at, always asking about your recommendations, always lingering just long enough to make you wonder. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? The message said. You stared at the screen for a moment. Not with fear, but with quiet curiosity. You didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, you weren't afraid to open that door.
Because you knew who you were now.
You weren't just someone who was left behind. You were someone who kept going. Who loved deeply, even when it hurt. Who raised a man with her own 2 hands. You replied with a soft smile on your lips. Yes.
I'd like that.
The following weekend, you found yourself sitting across from him. This kind-eyed stranger who knew nothing about your past, but somehow made space for it in the way he spoke to you. He didn't pry. He didn't assume. He just sat there, sipping his coffee, asking you what made you smile lately. And for once, the question didn't sting. Meanwhile, your son kept writing. The story was turning into something much bigger than the two of you. He had sent a few sample chapters to a publisher, not expecting much, just wanting to see. And when he received a reply saying they were deeply moved and wanted to see the full manuscript, you both sat in the kitchen, stunned, laughing and crying at once. He called it The Woman Who Stayed. You protested, but he smiled. It's not just your story anymore. It's a story a lot of people need to hear. And he was right. Because every woman who had been left behind, who had cried in silence, who had picked up the pieces and built something beautiful from the rubble, deserved to see herself on those pages. And now she could. Your son's relationship with his father became something cautious but respectful. Not perfect, but honest. They were learning how to be something new to each other. Not forced. Not rehearsed. Just real. And that was enough. You started writing too. Not a book, not yet, but small things.
Letters to yourself.
To your younger self. To the girl who once thought love was everything. To the woman who learned that being whole didn't require anyone else's presence. The more you wrote, the lighter you felt, as if words could finally carry what your shoulders had held alone for so long. There were moments when the past still whispered. A scent. A song.
A sudden memory in the middle of folding laundry.
But you no longer chased those ghosts. You let them visit, then gently closed the door behind them. Because your life wasn't built from what had been lost. It was built from everything you refused to give up on. Your son's book went to print 6 months later. At the launch event, he stood on stage, hands trembling slightly, and said, "This is for my mother."
The bravest woman I know.
The crowd clapped, but your heart nearly stopped. You hadn't cried like that in years, not out of pain, but pride. And just when you thought the chapter was closing, something else began to stir. Another unexpected truth was about to come forward, one you weren't prepared for. Not yet. It came as a message, once again. But this time, not from your son. Not from the man at the bookstore. Not even from your past. It was from a woman. Her name meant nothing to you at first.
Just a stranger.
Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. But what she wrote made your heart pause in mid-beat. She claimed to have known him, your son's father, during those lost years. She had found your name by accident, after reading an early copy of your son's book through a mutual friend. "I think we need to talk," she wrote. "There's something I believe you should know." You stared at the message for hours. Was it worth opening old wounds again? You had just begun to heal in ways you didn't think were possible. But the weight of curiosity pressed heavy on your chest. You replied, "Okay. When?" You met her at a quiet cafe, just like the one where you'd once sat face to face with the man who vanished. She was nervous, kind-eyed, soft-spoken. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. "He wrote this. Years ago. Before the accident. I found it recently, tucked inside a box of old letters. It's addressed to you."
Your breath caught.
The paper was yellowed, edges curled with time. His handwriting leapt off the page like a ghost from another life. The letter began simply, "If you ever read this, it means I had enough courage to admit how badly I failed you." Tears welled in your eyes before you reached the second sentence. In that letter, written long before fate rewrote his memory, he confessed everything. His fear. His uncertainty. His unworthiness. He never meant to leave you, but he didn't know how to stay. And he had written that letter with the intention of returning, of finding the words to make things right. But he never did. Because days later, the accident happened.
You folded the letter with trembling fingers, hands over your heart.
It didn't change the past. It didn't excuse it. But it filled in one last gap, a final thread in the tapestry you'd been weaving for years. Not all stories have clean edges. Some fray and tangle and stretch, but they still hold.
The woman smiled gently, sensing your need for silence.
I'm sorry if this brings you pain, she said softly. But it didn't. Not this time. You thanked her. Genuinely. Because somehow, she had carried this final piece to you across the years like a message in a bottle washed ashore. After that day, something in you shifted.
A deeper calm.
Not closure, but understanding. You had spent years questioning what you did wrong. Now you finally saw, you had never been the one who ran. You had been the one who remained, who raised, who endured. The man from the bookstore noticed. You seem lighter lately, he said one afternoon, handing you a poetry book with a dog-eared page. You smiled. I finally made peace with something I carried too long. He paused. Do you think there's room in your story for something new? You looked at him, at his steady eyes, his patient presence, and for the first time, your heart didn't tense at the thought of letting someone in. You didn't answer right away. You simply reached out, touched his hand lightly, and held it there. That was answer enough.
Back home, your son stood by the window, watching the sunset.
He had your letter in his hand, the one you had written to yourself and finally shared with him. You're incredible, Mom, he whispered.
Io pesam d'ahir llevies estrones you.
You laughed gently. You already are.
Stronger, maybe.
But even as the sky turned gold behind him, and the future waited quietly outside your door, something else was coming. A phone call. A name you hadn't heard in years. And what that person would say next would unravel everything you thought was finally finished.
Perguntar ao chat GPT.
You weren't expecting the call. It came late, just past 10, when the house was quiet and your tea had gone cold beside you. At first, you thought it might be your son. Or maybe him, the gentleman from the bookstore. But the number was unfamiliar.
A private one.
The kind that makes your stomach turn with a whisper of old ghosts. You answered with caution. Hello.
There was silence at first.
Then a voice. Soft.
Hesitant.
I hope I'm not intruding. I wasn't sure if I should call. A name followed. One you hadn't spoken in over 20 years. A name you had buried deep, thinking it belonged only to a chapter long closed. He was your first love.
The one before everything. Before the man who left. Before motherhood. Before life twisted in directions you never saw coming.
I read the book, he said. I recognized parts of it.
Not just the story.
You didn't know what to say.
You felt your hands gripping the armrest like a lifeline.
The voice continued. I never stopped wondering what happened to you. And now, I understand why I never found you. Your heart pounded. How could this be? Why now? What did the past still want from you? But something deeper within told you not to hang up. This wasn't random. It was another thread being pulled by something bigger than coincidence. He told you he had moved overseas years ago, started a new life, tried to forget. But no matter how far he went, something always pulled him back to you. When I saw your son's book in a store in London, he said, I knew. I just knew. You closed your eyes, trying to keep the world still. You remembered him vividly now. The way he used to laugh. The way he used to look at you like you were a secret the world hadn't yet discovered. Back then, life was innocent. You were two dreamers who thought love could shield you from anything. But life proved otherwise. What do you want from me? You finally asked. Not harsh, not bitter. Just tired of people showing up with late confessions. But his voice didn't carry expectation.
Only humility.
Nothing, he said.
Only to tell you that I never forgot.
And if there's a place in your heart, even a small one, where I still live, I wanted to say I'm sorry for leaving the way I did.
You felt tears. Again.
But not the kind that break you. The kind that wash away what no longer needs to be carried. The kind that clear space inside for new beginnings, however unexpected. You told him the truth. That life had been hard. That love had disappointed you. That you had become someone stronger because of it all. And that maybe, the girl he once loved was still in there somewhere. Wiser now, slower to trust, but still capable of feeling something real. He didn't ask to see you. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply said, "If you ever want to talk again."
Y ella vigir.
Then the line went silent. You sat there for a long time, phone in hand, heart between the past and something not yet named. The next morning, the sky looked different.
Not clearer. Not brighter. Just softer.
Like the world had finally exhaled with you. You poured your tea, watched the steam rise, and realized how full your life had become. Not because of the men who had entered it, but because of who you had become in spite of them. And yet, as you walked past your son's book on the kitchen table, another thought flickered. There were still chapters left to write. Not about pain. Not about abandonment. But about what happens when the heart, once shattered, learns to beat again. And in the stillness of that thought, your phone buzzed once more. This time, with a message that would lead you to the one truth you never expected to face. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story touched your heart in any way, know that it was made especially for you. A strong woman who endures, who feels deeply, but never stops moving forward. If you received this message, confirm it in the comments with the phrase, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." That lets me know you understood, that you felt it, and that you're ready to keep going, with your head held high, just like you always have. And take this moment to become part of our community. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because the next behind closed doors stories are on the way, and I really want you to be there with me for each one. Stay tuned, because sometimes, it's behind closed doors that the deepest truths are revealed. See you in the next one.